In this fifth video, we'll look at carbohydrates. Perhaps you know them as carbs, or sugars and related molecules. Carbohydrates are the first of four families of organic molecules I would like to discuss. Each family has unique characteristics and very different uses in your body. Carbohydrates are readily available sources of energy and provide some of the basic building blocks for synthesizing other organic molecules. Carbohydrates contain only the elements carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. The carbon atoms are bonded together to form the backbones of the molecules, and we find lots of hydroxyl groups attached. Carbohydrates are subdivided into three different types: monosaccharides, the simple sugars; disaccharides, made from two simple sugars joined together; and polysaccharides. These are very large polymers of simple sugars. There are lots of different kinds of polymers besides polysaccharides. Polymers are potentially huge molecules made of many smaller components linked together, much like the cars making up a railroad train. The cars, the smaller repeating subunits, are called monomers. Polysaccharides are polymers made of many simple sugars joined together. Proteins are polymers made from potentially hundreds of amino acids. DNA is a ladder-like polymer made up of nucleotides. Plastics are polymers commonly made from hydrocarbons, like those found in petroleum. Back to carbohydrates. Remember, all carbohydrates that we'll discuss contain only the elements carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. In simple sugars, these three elements are present in a ratio of 1 carbon to 2 hydrogens to 1 oxygen. For example, glucose, a very common simple sugar, has 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, and 6 oxygens. Another characteristic to look for in monosaccharides is lots of hydroxyl groups. Why do these simple sugars dissolve readily in water? I'll ask you that question again in class. You've been warned. The prefix di means two. Disaccharides are composed of two simple sugars. Table sugar, also called sucrose, is an example of a disaccharide. Like simple sugars, disaccharides contain only the elements carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, but the ratio of these three elements is not exactly 1 to 2 to 1. Let's look at why that's the case. Simple sugars are bonded together to form disaccharides using a reaction called dehydration. During dehydration, the hydroxyl group from the first sugar and a hydrogen from the second sugar are split off and form water. Water is removed, thus the name dehydration. The two carbons are now available to form a new bond joining the simple sugars together, forming our disaccharide. Hydrolysis is the opposite of dehydration. During hydrolysis, a molecule of water is inserted, breaking the bond between the two sugars making up the disaccharide. Polysaccharides are the largest carbohydrates. Like other sugars, they contain only carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. As the molecule gets larger, the ratio of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen gets further away from that 1 to 2 to 1 ratio found in the simple sugars. While polysaccharides have lots of polar hydroxyl groups, the huge size of the polysaccharides can limit their ability to dissolve in water. Starch, glycogen, and cellulose are examples of polysaccharides. They're similar in that they're all made of nothing but long chains of glucose. Even though they're similar in composition, starch, glycogen, and cellulose are very different molecules. Let's compare starch and cellulose. Starch is good food. It's easily digested and provides lots of energy. In each starch molecule, the glucose monomers, indicated by these orange hexagons, are all oriented in the same way. Note that the oxygen atom on the molecule is located in the upper right-hand corner. Let's compare that now to cellulose. As in the previous slide, the hexagons represent the glucose molecules. But notice how that in cellulose, every other glucose is flipped over. This seemingly small change alters the shape and the chemistry of the molecule. Cellulose cannot be digested by most organisms. Cellulose is an important component of our diet. Since the cellulose can't be digested, it passes through and helps to keep us regular. Ready for a break? Let's stop here now. In the next screencast, we'll start with lipids.